I had one horse left to my name. And in 1878, Nevada, for a woman with no family and no farm, that meant I had one thing left to sell: myself. The sign didn't say wife auction, but everyone knew what it was. A dusty corner of the Carson City livestock yard where men with cold eyes and heavy wallets came to bid on daughters of failed farms and broken families. They called it a contract auction, a contract for labor, for housekeeping, for companionship. We all knew what that meant. My name is Gabriella Morgan. I was 22, and my world had burned down 3 months ago when my father passed, leaving behind nothing but debt and a chestnut mare named Penny. The bankers took the farm. The creditors took the furniture. All I had left was the dress on my back and the small leather satchel clutched in my hands. So I stood on that rough-hewn platform next to a handful of other girls with the same hollow look in their eyes, waiting for my life to be sold for a handful of dollars. The auctioneer's voice droned on, a meaningless buzz in my ears. I just stared at Penny, tied to a post nearby, her white blaze a slash of purity in this grimy place. Saying goodbye to her was the only death I had left to face. Then he appeared. He moved through the crowd of boisterous ranchers like a storm cloud, silent and purposeful. He wasn't like the others, who leered and shouted crude remarks. He was tall, with sun-weathered features and a worn Stetson pulled low. When he stopped in front of the platform, he pushed the hat back, and I saw his eyes. They were the color of a summer storm, gray, intense, and they seemed to see right through the mask of dignity I was trying so desperately to hold on to. His spurs clinked softly on the dusty ground, the only sound in the sudden quiet that fell around him. The other bidders stepped back, a strange mix of fear and respect on their faces. "That one," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the auctioneer's patter. He pointed a single gloved finger directly at me. "And the horse." The auctioneer, a portly man with a sweaty brow, stammered, Well, Mr. Thornton, the bidding ain't exactly started for Miss Morgan here." "It has now," the man named Thornton said, his voice leaving no room for argument. $50 for the girl and the mare, as a pair." A collective gasp went through the crowd. $50 was a fortune. It was more than my father's farm was worth in the end. It was enough to buy a dozen girls like me. No one dared to counter. The auctioneer, seeing his chance for a quick and hefty commission, slammed his gavel down. "Sold to Mr. Xavier Thornton." Just like that, my life had a price: $50. Xavier Thornton didn't smile. He didn't even look at me. He just strode to the auctioneer, slapped a stack of coins on the table, and then walked over to untie Penny. He led her toward a wagon at the edge of the yard. I was frozen, unsure of what to do. Was I supposed to follow? Was I his property now? He glanced back over his shoulder, his storm gray eyes pinning me in place. "Well, are you coming? Or do you prefer sleeping in the dirt?" My legs moved before my mind could catch up. I scrambled down from the platform, clutching my satchel, and hurried after him. He didn't offer a hand to help me onto the wagon seat. He just waited, impassive, as I clambered up. He tied Penny to the back, and without another word he flicked the reins. The wagon lurched forward, leaving Carson City and the last remnants of my old life in a cloud of dust. We rode in silence for what felt like an eternity. The sun began to dip below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The beauty of it felt like a mockery. I was a prisoner, bought and paid for, being taken to God knows where by a man who looked like he was carved from stone. "My name is Gabriella Morgan," I finally whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He didn't look at me. "I know," he said. "I know who you are." The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't a simple acknowledgement. It was a statement. He hadn't just bought a random girl. He had bought me. But why? Why pay so much? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. After another mile, he spoke again, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "I own the Silvercrest Ranch, about 20 miles east. You'll work there." "Work as what?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He finally turned his head, and his gaze was so intense it felt like a physical weight. "You'll do as you're told, Miss Morgan, and you'll learn not to ask so many questions." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a rescue. This was a cage. I had traded a life of uncertainty for a life of servitude to a man whose silence was more terrifying than any threat. As the last rays of daylight vanished, leaving us in the deepening twilight, I saw the distant lights of a ranch appear on the horizon. Silver Crest. It sounded like a paradise. But as we drew closer, I had a sinking feeling it was going to be my personal hell. And I had no idea how right I was. The ranch wasn't welcoming, it was a fortress. A large two-story main house stood like a silent sentinel, surrounded by smaller bunkhouses and a massive barn. Everything was neat, orderly, and unnervingly quiet. There was no laughter, no music, just the whisper of the wind through the pines. Lanterns glowed in the windows, but they didn't look warm. They looked like the eyes of a predator, watching and waiting. As Xavier pulled the wagon into the yard, a figure emerged from the main house. A woman, tall and angular, with the same storm-gray eyes as Xavier. But where his were like a brewing storm, hers were like the dead of winter, cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of warmth. "You're back," she said, her voice crisp and commanding. Her eyes flicked from her brother to me, and her gaze was a physical inspection, dismissive and chilling. "And this is the new one." The new one. The words hung in the air, confirming my darkest fears. I wasn't the first. "Helen, this is Miss Gabriella Morgan," Xavier said, his voice flat. "Miss Morgan, my sister, Helen Thornton." I managed a small nod, my throat too tight to speak. Helen didn't offer a hand or a word of welcome. She just stared at me, her lips a thin, hard line. "Mrs. Abernathy has prepared a room in the women's quarters," she said, her words directed at Xavier, as if I wasn't even there. "See that she's settled. I'll speak with her in the morning about her duties." Xavier grunted in response and jumped down from the wagon. He turned and, for the first time, offered me his hand. His touch was firm and calloused, and it sent an unwelcome jolt through me. As I stepped onto the ground, he gestured toward one of the smaller buildings. "That's the women's bunkhouse. Your horse will be in the stable." He said it simply, a statement of fact, before turning to unhitch Penny. He didn't seem cruel, just detached, as if he were moving pieces on a chessboard. Helen watched him lead Penny away, then her icy gaze returned to me. "Come." It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. I followed her toward the bunkhouse, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The building was simple, clean, but stark. 6 narrow beds lined the walls. 3 of them were neatly made but empty. One had a few belongings, a shawl draped over the footboard, a worn book on the pillow. It seemed only one other person lived here. Helen pointed to an empty bed near the far window. "This is yours. There's a trunk for your things. The washroom is through there. We rise at dawn. We do not tolerate laziness at Silver Crest." "Thank you," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. She gave a short, sharp nod. "Don't thank me. You're not a guest. You are here to work. Your contract was for 1 year of service. Fulfill it, and you will be free to go. Fail to do so." She let the threat hang in the air, a venomous promise. "Xavier may have paid for you, but I run this household. You will answer to me. Is that understood?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, looking down at my worn boots. "Good." With that, she turned and swept out of the room, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence. I sank onto the thin mattress, the springs groaning in protest. I opened my satchel and laid out my few possessions: a spare dress, a hairbrush, and a small framed photograph of my parents. Their smiling faces felt like a relic from another lifetime. I was trapped. A 1-year contract. What happened after a year? What happened to the girls who were here before me? Where were they? Just then, the door creaked open. An older woman, plump and gray-haired, bustled in. She had a kind, tired face, but her eyes were full of a deep-seated sadness. "You must be the new one," she said softly. "I'm Edith Abernathy, the cook." "Gabriella Morgan," I managed to say. Her eyes softened with something that looked like pity. "It's a hard place, child. Keep your head down, do your work, and don't cross Miss Helen." She busied herself at her own cot, avoiding my gaze. "Mrs. Abernathy," I began, my voice a desperate whisper. "The other girls, where are they?" She flinched, her hands freezing for a fraction of a second. "What other girls?" she asked, her voice suddenly strained. "The beds," I said, gesturing to the two other empty cots. "They look like they were used recently." Mrs. Abernathy wouldn't look at me. She just shook her head, her lips pressed tightly together. "Best not to ask questions, child. Some things, some things are better left unknown." She quickly turned her back to me, signaling an end to the conversation. A chilling dread washed over me. I wasn't just a servant, I was a replacement. I looked out the small window, toward the main house where a single lamp burned in an upstairs window. I was in a beautiful, silent prison, owned by a man of storms and run by a woman of ice. And something terrible had happened to the women who slept in these beds before me. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, my mind racing. What had I gotten myself into? Every instinct screamed at me to run. But where would I go? I had nothing, no money, no family, and Penny was here. They had my horse. They had my life. I was their prisoner, and I had a terrifying feeling that the one-year contract was a lie. That for the women who came to Silver Crest, there was no leaving. Ever. The next morning, I woke before dawn to the clanging of a bell. The routine was brutally efficient. A simple breakfast of porridge in the main house kitchen, eaten in silence under the watchful eye of Helen. Xavier was there, sitting at the head of the table with his foreman, a weathered man named George. He didn't speak to me, didn't even acknowledge my presence. He just ate, his face an unreadable mask. My duties were simple, back-breaking chores, mucking stalls, hauling water, tending the garden, and helping Mrs. Abernathy in the kitchen. I was an object, a pair of hands. Helen watched my every move, her criticism sharp and constant. My dress wasn't clean enough. I wasn't scrubbing fast enough. I was using too much soap. But the hardest part was the silence. The other ranch hands, a dozen rough-looking men, never spoke to me. They averted their eyes when I passed. Even George, the foreman, would only give me curt, necessary instructions. It was an orchestrated isolation. They were all afraid of something, afraid of Helen. I tried to speak to Sarah, the only other woman in the bunkhouse, a young, timid girl with blonde hair and haunted eyes who helped with housekeeping. But she was terrified. Whenever I tried to ask about the ranch or the Thorntons, she would pale and scurry away, muttering about having work to do. Everyone here was walking on eggshells. My only solace was Penny. Every day after my chores were done, I was allowed a half hour with her in the corral. I'd brush her coat until it shone, whisper all my fears into her velvety ear. She was my only link to who I used to be. During one of these evenings, as I was grooming Penny, Xavier appeared at the corral fence. He watched me for a long time, his arms crossed over his chest. "Your father bred fine horses," he said, his voice startling me. "He did," I replied, not looking at him, my hands continuing their rhythmic strokes. "She's got a good spirit, strong legs," he continued, his eyes assessing Penny with an expert's gaze. Then his eyes shifted to me. "You're good with her. You have a gentle hand." I didn't know what to say. Was this a test? A trick? I just nodded, keeping my focus on my horse. "Tomorrow," he said, pushing himself off the fence, "you will no longer be mucking stalls. You will assist George with exercising the horses." I looked up, surprised. It was a promotion of sorts, a move from mindless labor to skilled work. But why? "Helen won't like that," I said before I could stop myself. A flicker of something, annoyance, defiance, crossed his face. "I am the master of this ranch, Miss Morgan. My sister manages the household. The horses are my domain. You will report to the stables after breakfast." He turned and walked away without another word, leaving me more confused than ever. He was a paradox. One moment, a cold, unfeeling master. The next, a man who recognized skill and seemed to defy his own sister. Who was the real Xavier Thornton? And what did he want from me? The next day, working in the stables, felt like breathing fresh air after being trapped underground. George, the foreman, was still quiet, but he seemed to relax slightly away from the main house. He showed me the horses I was to exercise, all well-bred and impeccably cared for. As I was saddling a docile mare, my eyes caught something on a stallion in the far stall. A brand. It wasn't the Silver Crest brand, the elegant SC I'd seen on the other horses. This was different. A coiled serpent with a silver crown. It was strange, intricate, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. "What is that brand?" I asked George, trying to keep my voice casual. He stiffened, his friendly demeanor vanishing. "That's Mr. Thornton's personal stock. Not for sale." His voice was clipped, his eyes warning me off. Later that afternoon, as I was riding in the far pasture, I saw it again, on a different horse, a silver serpent. It wasn't a brand for personal stock. It was a symbol, a secret one. Days turned into a week, then two. I fell into a routine, my new duties with the horses a welcome distraction from the oppressive atmosphere of the ranch. But the mystery of Silver Crest gnawed at me. The empty beds, the silence, the strange brand. It all felt connected, pieces of a puzzle I couldn't solve. Then came the night that changed everything. I was in the stable late, checking on Penny, who seemed a bit off her feed. As I was leaving, I overheard voices coming from the tack room. Xavier and Helen. Their words were low and sharp. "The preparations are nearly complete," Helen said, her voice like splintered ice. "The new moon is in 5 days. We must be ready." "It's too soon, Helen." Xavier's voice was strained, tight with a tension I'd never heard before. "She's not ready." She? Were they talking about me? "She doesn't need to be ready," Helen hissed. "She only needs to be present. The bloodline is what matters. Her father's debt must be paid. The serpents are growing impatient." My heart stopped. Her father's debt, the silver serpents, the brand. It all clicked into place with a sickening thud. The bankers hadn't taken our farm. These people had. This secret society. My father hadn't died from a weak heart. Had they killed him? And the new moon. Preparations. A terrible cold certainty washed over me. Mrs. Abernathy had spoken of a cleansing in a hushed, terrified whisper one night when she thought I was asleep. A ritual that happened every year. They weren't just going to keep me here. They were going to use me for something. Something that required my bloodline. Something that happened on the new moon. I backed away from the door, my body trembling uncontrollably. I had to get out. I had to run. I crept back to the bunkhouse, my mind a whirlwind of terror. I started throwing my meager belongings into my satchel. I had to get Penny and go. Now, tonight. As I reached for the photograph of my parents, my trembling fingers knocked it from the nightstand. The frame hit the floor and splintered. As I picked it up, I saw that the backing had come loose. Tucked behind the photograph was a small folded piece of paper I had never seen before. My father's handwriting. My hands shook as I unfolded it. It wasn't a letter. It was a drawing. A map. And in the corner of the map, a symbol was sketched. A coiled serpent with a silver crown. Underneath it, my father had written 4 words. "The horse is the key. The horse is the key." The words echoed in my mind. A ghostly whisper from my father. What did it mean? I stared at the crude map, then at the serpent symbol. It was the brand. The brand on Xavier's personal stock. My father was connected to these people. He knew about the silver serpents. Panic gave way to a cold, razor-sharp focus. Running blindly was a death sentence. They would hunt me down. I had to understand what was happening. I had to find the key. The next day I feigned illness, convincing Mrs. Abernathy I had a fever. It earned me a sharp, suspicious glare from Helen, but it gave me the one thing I needed. Time. While everyone was out for the day's work, I slipped out of the bunkhouse and made my way to the stables. I went straight to the stallion with the serpent brand. I ran my hands over his powerful shoulders, my heart hammering. What was I looking for? The brand itself was just seared flesh. There was nothing hidden there. The horse is the key. Not a horse. The horse. My blood ran cold. Penny. I raced to her stall. She nickered softly, nudging my shoulder. I ran my hands over every inch of her, searching for something, anything. A hidden pouch in her saddle? A secret compartment in her bridle? Nothing. Frustrated, I leaned my forehead against her warm flank, my mind racing. What had my father meant? He bred her himself. He trained her. He loved her. He wouldn't have hurt her. My eyes fell to her hooves. On a whim, I knelt and picked up her front left hoof, pretending to check it for stones. Her shoes were new, put on by the Silver Crest farrier just last week. But as I traced the line of the iron shoe, my finger caught on something, a tiny, almost invisible inscription on the inside edge of the metal. It wasn't a word. It was a series of numbers, coordinates. My breath hitched. This was it. The key wasn't the horse itself, but what it carried. My father had hidden a message on her, right under their noses. I quickly memorized the numbers and set her hoof down, my mind spinning. The numbers meant nothing without the map, and the map was useless without knowing what it led to. I needed more information, and there was only one place I might find it. Xavier's study. It was a long shot, a terrible risk, but it was the only one I had. That night I waited until the entire ranch was asleep. I slipped out of the bunkhouse, a shadow in the moonlight, and crept toward the main house. The door was unlocked, as I knew it would be. In this fortress, they feared no one from the outside. The real danger was already inside. I navigated the dark, silent house by memory, my bare feet making no sound on the wooden floors. Xavier's study was on the ground floor, its door slightly ajar. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. I pushed it open and slipped inside. The room smelled of leather, tobacco, and secrets. A massive oak desk dominated the space, covered in neat stacks of papers. A floor-to-ceiling bookshelf lined one wall. I had to be fast. I went to the desk first, carefully sifting through the papers. Ledgers, bills of sale, correspondence about horses. Nothing. I turned to the bookshelf. It was filled with books on animal husbandry, history, and classic literature. My eyes scanned the titles, looking for anything out of place. And then I saw it, a thick, leather-bound volume with no title on the spine. It was wedged between a copy of Shakespeare and a book on Nevada geology. My fingers trembled as I pulled it from the shelf. It wasn't a book. It was a journal. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was elegant, precise, and cold. It was Helen's. It was a logbook for the Silver Serpents. I flipped through the pages, my stomach churning. It detailed everything. Extortion, land grabs, political assassinations. They were more than a secret society. They were a shadow government controlling half the territory. And then I found the entries about the cleansing. It wasn't a ritual sacrifice of a person. It was a culling. Each year on the new moon, they brought in new recruits, destitute women like me, who were forced into servitude. At the end of the year, the ones who were deemed unsuitable, too rebellious, or who simply knew too much were disposed of. The two empty beds in my bunkhouse, they hadn't left. They had been culled. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the journal. I was reading my own death sentence. But the most chilling part was the entry about my father. Elias Morgan attempted to betray the Brotherhood. He stole the serpent's heart and fled. His debt is now passed to his only living heir. The girl is the final piece. Her blood will sanctify the new heart and restore our fortune. The serpent's heart, fortune. It wasn't about a ritual. It was about treasure. My father had stolen something from them, something incredibly valuable. And they thought I knew where it was. The contract, the work, it was all a charade to break me, to force me to reveal a secret I didn't even know I had. Suddenly, I heard the floorboards creak in the hallway. My heart leaped into my throat. I shoved the journal back into its place on the shelf and ducked behind the heavy velvet curtains just as the study door swung open. Xavier walked in. He moved to the desk and lit a lamp, casting his long shadow across the room. He looked exhausted, the lines on his face deeper than I'd ever seen them. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and slumped into his chair, staring into the darkness. He wasn't the cold, calculating master from the journal. He looked broken, a prisoner in his own home. He let out a long, shuddering breath and spoke to the empty room, his voice a raw, grief-stricken whisper. "I'm sorry, Father. I'm trying, but she's too strong." He wasn't talking to a ghost. He was talking as if his father were there, a silent witness to his torment. And then he did something that stunned me. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn, creased, as if he'd read it 100 times. He unfolded it and stared at it, his expression a mixture of pain and resolve. From my hiding place, I could just make out the drawing on the paper. It was the other half of my father's map. Xavier had the other half of the map. He was a part of this, a central part, but his whispered words, they didn't sound like a man in control. They sounded like a man in a trap. I stayed hidden until he finished his whiskey and left, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Once he was gone, I slipped out of the study and back to the bunkhouse, my mind racing faster than ever. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was more monstrous than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about greed. It was a legacy, a twisted inheritance. Xavier wasn't the Serpent King. He was the reluctant prince, and his sister Helen, she was the queen. The new moon was in 4 days. Time was running out. I had the coordinates from Penny's shoe and half a map. Xavier had the other half, and Helen had the journal, the key to their entire operation. I couldn't trust anyone. My only chance was to play their game, to pretend to be the broken, compliant servant they wanted me to be. The next morning, I was a different person. I kept my eyes down. I followed Helen's orders without question. I was meek, silent, and obedient. I saw the flicker of triumph in her eyes. She thought she was winning. She thought she had broken me. I used my time in the stables to my advantage. I pushed Penny harder during our exercises, building her stamina. I secretly packed a small canvas bag with oats, a water skin, and a strip of dried beef from the kitchens, hiding it in a hollowed-out section of the stable wall. I was preparing for a journey. Xavier watched me, his expression unreadable. Did he suspect something? Or was he just observing the girl he was supposed to break? One afternoon, he found me by the creek, letting the horses drink. "You've grown quiet, Miss Morgan," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I've learned my place, Mr. Thornton," I replied, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. He winced, a barely perceptible flicker of pain in his eyes. "This was not the life I would have chosen for you." "But it's the one you bought for me," I shot back, a flash of my old fire breaking through. He looked away toward the distant mountains. "There are things you don't understand, debts that are older than both of us." "My father's debt?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. He flinched as if I'd struck him. He looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw not a captor, but a fellow prisoner. His eyes were pleading. "Be careful, Gabriella. Watch my sister. Don't let her see your strength. The new moon. It's a dangerous time." It was a warning, a cryptic, desperate warning. He knew what Helen was planning, and he was afraid of it. He was afraid for me. That night, a storm rolled in, a real one. Wind howled and rain lashed against the bunkhouse windows. It was the perfect cover. The new moon was 2 days away. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to get to that map. I waited until the storm was at its peak, the thunder shaking the very foundations of the ranch. I slipped out and ran to the main house, the icy rain soaking me to the bone in seconds. The study was my goal. I had to get Xavier's half of the map, and if I was lucky, Helen's journal as well. I crept into the silent house, my heart pounding in time with the thunder. I reached the study, pushed the door open, and froze. A single lamp was lit on the desk, and Helen was sitting there, a shotgun resting across her lap. She looked up as I entered, and a slow, cruel smile spread across her face. "I was wondering when you'd stop pretending," she said, her voice silky smooth. "Did you really think you could fool me, little girl? I've been watching you. I saw you sneaking out. I saw you preparing." My blood turned to ice. It was a trap. She knew. "My brother," she sighed, shaking her head in mock pity. "He's grown soft. He sees you and thinks of redemption. He wants to save you." She leaned forward, her eyes glittering in the lamplight. "But I know the truth. Salvation isn't for the likes of us, is it? There is only debt and payment." "What do you want from me?" I whispered, my eyes darting toward the door. "Oh, don't bother," she chuckled. "George is outside. He is loyal to the family, loyal to me." She gestured with the shotgun toward a chair. "Sit. We have much to discuss. You see, you and I are going on a little trip, To find the serpent's heart. Your father was a fool to think he could hide it from us forever. Suddenly, the main door of the house crashed open. Xavier stood there, drenched from the rain, his face a mask of fury. In his hand, he held a pistol. "Let her go, Helen," he growled, his voice a low thunder that matched the storm outside. Helen laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "Dear brother, always so dramatic, always trying to play the hero. You can't stop this. It's our birthright. Father's legacy." "Father's legacy was a poison that killed him from the inside out," Xavier shouted. "I won't let it kill her too." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong," Helen said, her smile turning venomous. "Father didn't die from poison, brother. He died from a weak heart. A weakness you seem to have inherited." She raised the shotgun, aiming it not at me, but directly at Xavier. "Now drop the gun, or the girl's blood won't be the only thing sanctifying our new fortune." But then something happened that no one expected. George the foreman appeared in the doorway behind Xavier. But he wasn't holding a gun on his boss. He was holding a gun on Helen. "It's over, Miss Thornton," George said, his voice heavy with regret. Xavier's father, he was a hard man, but he was an honorable one. He never would have stood for what you've become. He made me promise to protect his son, and that's what I'm doing." Helen's face contorted with rage. She was cornered. For a split second, her eyes darted between her brother and her foreman. And in that moment of hesitation, I acted. I lunged forward, grabbing a heavy glass inkwell from the desk and hurling it at the lamp. The room plunged into darkness. A shotgun blast roared, the flash momentarily illuminating Helen's furious face. A pistol shot answered it. Someone screamed. I didn't wait to see who. I scrambled out of the study and ran, blindly into the storm. I didn't know who was shot, who was winning. All I knew was that I had to get to Penny. I had to get to the coordinates. It was my only hope. As I burst out of the house and into the muddy yard, a hand grabbed my arm. I screamed and fought, but the grip was like iron. "It's me!" Xavier's voice hissed in my ear. He was alive. He pulled me toward the stables. "George is holding her off. We don't have much time. The map, I have my half." "I know where to go," I yelled over the wind. "The coordinates were on Penny's shoe." He didn't question it. We reached the stables, and in a flurry of frantic activity, we saddled Penny in his own powerful stallion. As we mounted up, we heard another shotgun blast from the house, followed by a terrifying silence. We didn't know if George was alive or dead. "We have to go," Xavier yelled. "Now!" We spurred our horses and galloped out of the fortress of Silver Crest, plunging into the stormy darkness. We were fugitives, hunted by a monster of our own blood. We had a partial map, a set of coordinates, and a secret that had already cost my father his life. We were riding not just for our freedom, but for our very survival. And we were riding straight into the heart of the serpent's territory. The storm was our shield. It washed away our tracks and masked the sound of our flight. We rode hard, pushing the horses through the night, guided by the numbers I had etched into my memory. The land grew wilder, the trail disappearing into a maze of canyons and rocky outcrops. This was untamed country, a place where people could disappear. At dawn, the storm broke. We found shelter in a small, hidden cave, allowing the horses to rest. Xavier was grim, his face etched with worry for George. "He knew the risk," he said, his voice raw. "George was more of a father to me than my own father was by the end. He saw what Helen was becoming." He finally pulled out his half of the map. I pulled out mine. We laid the two worn pieces of paper on a flat rock. They fit together perfectly. My father's rough sketch aligned with the more detailed drawing Xavier possessed. The two maps formed a complete picture of the treacherous canyon lands we were in. And at the center, marked with the serpent symbol, was a place called Devil's Jaw. The coordinates from Penny's shoe pointed to a specific spot right in the middle of it. "The serpent's heart," I whispered. "What is it?" Xavier looked at me, his storm gray eyes filled with a century of shadows. "It's not a jewel, Gabriella. It's a mine. A silver mine so rich it could make a man a king, or a monster." He told me the story. His grandfather discovered it decades ago. He used its immense wealth to build a secret empire, buying politicians, judges, and lawmen. The silver serpents were his enforcers. His father inherited the empire and the sickness that came with it, but he grew weary, haunted by the blood on his hands. He wanted out. That's when Helen made her move, Xavier said, his voice laced with bitterness. She was always the true believer. She saw our father's guilt as weakness. She poisoned him, slowly, making it look like a failing heart. She framed rivals, consolidated power. When he died, she took control. I was her puppet, forced to play my part, or she threatened to cleanse all the women she'd already trapped at the ranch. It was all a lie. The auction, the debt, the contract. Xavier hadn't bought me to break me. He'd bought me to save me. He knew Helen would come for me eventually to get to the mine, and he thought he could protect me at the ranch. He was trying to dismantle the serpents from within, with George as his only ally. My father knew yours, Xavier continued. Elias Morgan was one of the few good men in the serpents. When he realized what Helen was, he tried to stop her. He created this map, a way to expose the mine's location to the federal authorities. He stole a ledger, the real serpent's heart, that detailed every crime, every bribe, every murder. He hid the ledger at the mine, then split the map and tried to run. But Helen caught him. She killed him and took back half the map. But she never found the ledger or the other half. Until now. We knew we couldn't just run. Helen would never stop hunting us. Our only hope was to get to that mine, find the ledger, and use it to destroy her and the entire organization. We rode for another day, the landscape growing more menacing. Devil's Jaw was well named, a brutal gash in the earth, a labyrinth of twisted rock and sheer cliffs. Using the map, we navigated the treacherous paths until we reached the coordinates. There was nothing there, just a sheer rock face. It has to be here, I said, my hope crumbling. Xavier examined the rock wall, running his hands over the surface. My father was a clever man. He loved puzzles. He traced the lines in the rock. It's not a door. It's a pattern. His eyes lit up. He looked at the serpent brand on his horse. The brand. It's not just a symbol. It's a lock. He began to press on the rocks in the sequence of the serpent's coils on the brand. With a deep groan, a section of the rock wall receded, revealing a dark opening. The entrance to the mine. The air inside was stale and cold. We lit a lantern, the flickering light revealing a narrow tunnel shored up with heavy timbers. We moved cautiously, the silence of the mine pressing in on us. After about 100 yards, the tunnel opened into a massive cavern, and our jaws dropped. The walls glittered and shone. Veins of pure raw silver, thicker than my arm, crisscrossed the rock in every direction. It was a river of silver, a fortune beyond imagination. This is it, Xavier breathed, his voice filled with awe and disgust. The poison. In the center of the cavern there was a small, crudely built desk, and on it, a single, heavy, leather-bound book. The ledger. I opened it. Page after page of names, dates, and amounts. Decades of corruption laid bare. It was enough to bring down senators, to rewrite the history of the entire territory. My father's last entry was on the final page. Let this truth be the light that scours the shadow. For Gabriella. Tears streamed down my face. He had done this for me. He had died for me. We have it, I said to Xavier, my voice thick with emotion. We can end this. Not yet, you can't. The voice echoed from the mine entrance, cold and triumphant. We spun around. Helen stood there, silhouetted against the daylight. She wasn't alone. Behind her stood a dozen of the most loyal, most brutal ranch hands. And next to her, his face bruised and his arm in a sling, was George. A pistol was pressed to his head. You disappoint me, brother, Helen said, stepping into the cavern, her eyes drinking in the sight of the silver. And you, little farm girl, did you really think it would be this easy? I let you run. I followed you right to my inheritance. It's over, Helen, Xavier said, stepping in front of me, shielding me with his body. Oh, it's just beginning, she purred. Hand me the ledger. Then I'll let you choose. You can die here together in the dark, or you can watch as I take everything you love and twist it into something beautiful and terrible. She smiled, a flash of white teeth in the gloom. Poor old George was just the beginning. She had won. She had the mine, the ledger, and us. We were trapped 1,000 feet underground, with no way out. The serpent had coiled around us, and it was ready to strike. Helen's laughter echoed in the silver-laced cavern, a sound of pure madness. The ledger, brother. Now. Xavier's hand holding his pistol was steady. You'll kill us anyway, Helen. Of course I will, she said with a shrug, but I can make it quick. Or I can start with your friend George and then move on to the girl. I can be very creative. The man holding George pressed the gun harder against his temple. George's face was pale, but his eyes were defiant. My mind raced, searching for an escape where there was none. We were surrounded, outgunned. But my father didn't raise a fool. He taught me to think, to see the things others missed. I looked around the cavern, at the silver, the timbers holding up the roof, the single lantern casting long, dancing shadows. And then I saw it. In the far corner of the cavern, half hidden behind a pile of rubble, was a stack of wooden crates. They were stenciled with a word I recognized from my father's stories about his brief, disastrous time as a prospector before he turned to farming. Dynamite. All right, Helen, I said, my voice shaking, but loud enough to carry. You win. Xavier shot me a look of disbelief, but I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. He trusted me. He lowered his pistol. I picked up the heavy ledger. You want the serpent's heart? Here it is. I started walking toward her, slow and deliberate. Her eyes and the eyes of all her men were locked on the ledger. They were mesmerized by their prize. Closer, little girl, Helen hissed, her greed making her careless. As I walked, I angled my path toward the center of the cavern, my boots crunching on the loose rock. I held the ledger out in front of me, like an offering. Just let them go, I said, nodding toward Xavier and George. You have what you want. You have the mine. You have the truth. Helen laughed. You have no power to bargain. Oh, I think I do, I said. I stopped directly beneath a massive, cross-bracing timber that was central to the mine's support structure. I looked her dead in the eye, and for the first time, she saw the fire in mine. This mine has one more secret. With a scream of pure rage and desperation, I didn't hand her the ledger. I threw it, not at her, but straight up into the air, as high as I could. As every eye, including hers, followed the book arcing through the air, I turned and sprinted toward the dynamite. Xavier understood instantly. George, now! He roared. He fired his pistol, not at Helen, but at the rock wall just above her head. A shower of stone chips rained down, causing her men to flinch and look up in confusion. In that same instant, George stomped down hard on the foot of the man holding him, ramming his head back into his captor's face. The gun went off, the shot going wild into the ceiling. Chaos erupted. I reached the crates, my hands fumbling in the dim light. I didn't need a long fuse. I just needed a spark. I grabbed a stick of dynamite and tore off the paper, exposing the waxy core. I ran back toward the lantern sitting on the desk. Helen, recovering her senses, screamed, Kill them! Kill them all! Gunshots exploded in the enclosed space, the sound deafening. Xavier and George took cover behind the desk, returning fire. I ignored it all. I had one purpose. I shoved the end of the dynamite stick into the lantern's flame. The fuse I'd made with the torn paper caught, sputtering to life. It was terrifyingly short, maybe 5 seconds. Xavier! I screamed. He saw what I was doing. His eyes widened. Gabriella, no! But I didn't hesitate. I turned and hurled the lit dynamite not at Helen, but at the base of the central support timber. Get out! I shrieked. Xavier grabbed George, dragging him toward the mine entrance. I scrambled after them, the rock floor trembling beneath my feet. The dynamite exploded with a deafening roar. The central timber splintered, then shattered. A deep, groaning crack echoed through the cavern as the ceiling began to give way. Helen and her men were frozen for a split second, their faces a mixture of shock and terror, looking up at their silver tomb collapsing upon them. We burst out of the mine entrance just as the entire mountain seemed to shudder. A massive cloud of dust and debris billowed out of the opening. Behind us, the sound of 1,000,000 tons of rock crashing down, a final, definitive end to the glittering poison of the serpent's heart. We didn't stop. We scrambled onto our horses and rode like the devil himself was on our heels, not stopping until Devil's Jaw was a distant memory. The silver serpents were buried. Helen was gone. The ledger, the evidence of their crimes, was lost forever. But it didn't matter. The head of the serpent had been severed. The organization would crumble into infighting and chaos without its leader and its fortune. We rode back to Silver Crest, not as prisoners, but as survivors. The few remaining ranch hands, the ones who weren't Helen's fanatics, laid down their arms the moment they saw us. George's word being enough to convince them the reign of terror was over. Mrs. Abernathy and Sarah wept with relief. The ranch was ours now, free from the shadows of the past. In the weeks that followed, Xavier and I, with George by our side, began the slow process of rebuilding. We freed the other women, giving them their back pay and the choice to leave or stay on as proper employees. We began transforming Silver Crest from a prison into a sanctuary. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Xavier and I stood on the porch of the main house watching Penny graze peacefully in the corral. "My father's debt is finally paid," I said softly. Xavier took my hand, his grip warm and steady. "No, your father left a legacy of courage, and he gave me the greatest treasure in the world." He turned to me, his storm gray eyes no longer holding shadows, but a clear, bright sky. "He led me to you." He didn't have to propose. We both knew. Our trial by fire and darkness had forged something unbreakable between us. We were no longer a master and his servant, a captor and his prisoner. We were partners, survivors. The story of Silver Crest became a legend in the territory, a tale of a haunted ranch that was reborn. They never knew the whole truth of the secret society, the silver mine, or the sister who tried to bury her own brother. They just knew that the darkness had lifted. We built a new life, a good life, a free life. And it all started at a dusty auction in Carson City, with a cowboy who looked at a broken girl and said, "She's coming home with me." He was more right than either of us could have ever known. If you enjoyed this ride into the wild heart of the West, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the tale we uncover next.